Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It's a pleasure to talk to you about my work on the Quran and evolution, and to brief you very quickly on a 20-year journey. I'll try and take 15 minutes to be able to do this. So this is a presentation that I made in 2012. And by that time, in 10 years, I had already made uh, the theory behind this idea of how Quran would link up with evolution. Now, this is really important for the Muslims to understand evolution in depth because the atheistic standpoint really drives up science in a major way and has a huge impact on biology as well as on physics and chemistry. So a kind of how we understand the world today. Now, I showed this picture of Katrina in 2012, depicting that the storm that came in 2005 is about to land on the Muslims in the West, and it will have its effects very sharply felt in the East as well. And this is the storm of atheism. I rate that the storm has dual origin, and that is very much depicted in Surah Kahf in ayats 4 to 6, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the Christians declared Jesus as the Son of God, and Muslims abandoned the Quran. And the result of this is the billion atheist tsunami that we face today. If you count the number of mu'mineen versus the Muslimin, the number of mu'mineen is really, very small. So Richard Dawkins, for example, is a very strong proponent of atheism, and he bases his atheistic worldview on Darwinian evolution. Sam Harris, who says in Newsweek, he said that the Islamic fundamentalism is a problem because fundamentals of Islam are a problem. And Victor Stenger wrote God, the Failed Hypothesis. And he says that God, who is supposed to perform certain acts from creating the universe and designing life to answering prayers and revealing universal truths to humanity, is a testable hypothesis. And if this hypothesis, if the tests are failed, then the God hypothesis fails. It's so interesting that Victor Stenger today is asking the Muslims the same questions that was asked by Ibrahim والسلام, from his people. He said, do these idols listen to you? Do they respond to you? And it's a 180-degree turn, and we're being asked the same questions. Now, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala listens. He answers our prayers. He creates for us. He protects us. He guides us and grants us wisdom and knowledge. But that is not clear to the atheists. We have to respond to them in the language of science. In the way that the question is asked, we have to propose the answer as well. That's why the presentation. Now, the new atheistic movement, puts faith in God as a problem in the world. And it says that it's a cause of innumerable evils and should be rejected on moral grounds. That is the haughtiness of the new atheists today. Before that, there was scientific naturalism, which said that all living beings, including human intelligence, behavior, can be explained ultimately in purely natural terms, and that would mean scientifically Darwinian evolution. So scientific naturalism and the new atheistic belief rejects God and afterlife and stems from the theory of Darwinian evolution. And that thought process affects science, and as a result, it affects all humanity, including the Muslims. Now, what is the challenge for the Muslims? If we study the Quran, the creation of man beginning with Adam والسلام, was described in 6 different terms which represent clay. تراب, طين, سلالة من طين, من طين لازم, and so on. And if you look at clay from a scientific standpoint, it is aluminum silicates. There's no carbon in it. And we are made of carbon. The entire carbon cycle is what leads to biological life. Interestingly, if you look at carbon, silicon, and aluminum in the periodic table, carbon has atomic number 6 and silicon has atomic number 14. So 8 protons have to be thrown out from silicon to make it into carbon, and 7 from aluminum to make it into carbon. And that is not a chemical reaction. It is a nuclear reaction. So in the creation of man, was a nuclear reaction involved? Of course not. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demonstrates to Bani Israel through his noble messenger, Hazrat Isa والسلام, when he said that you can see that I make for you from clay the model of a bird and breathe into it, and by Allah's permission, it becomes a bird and flies. And there was no evolution there, and there was no nuclear reaction there. But that is the way of the heart. And for the way of the heart to be cleared, many barriers of the mind have to be eliminated. And therefore, we have to go from a scientific standpoint and explain evolution and study it in depth. There are 2 major pillars of Darwinian evolution. 1, randomness. Things happen on their own. And 2, prolonged period of time. So millions of years, things just collided against each other, and then something new formed. New bonds formed, new molecules formed, and from new molecules, new cells formed, and from cells, organisms formed. So the Darwinian evolution proposed in the 1800s shows that there's a gradual movement from one form to the other, and therefore a large number of intermediate species are required. The geological record is clear that there are no intermediate species. So in 1972, Niles and Enrich proposed their punctuated equilibrium model, which showed that things remained stable for a while and then suddenly changed. And this does not require any intermediate species. There is stasis, and then there is rapid development, and it initiates in isolated populations. This model was proven in 1993 when it was shown that an RNA virus evolved mutations in a very short period of time. There were a few mutations here and there, but majority of the mutations happened in one period of time. It did not, go as a linear line, upscale line, where there were mutations happening all the time. No, they all happened in a very short period of time. Moreover, these mutations were geographically affected. So areas which are close together had fewer mutations, and then as the virus moved to a distance, more mutations happened. Now that fits into what is known as the power law. There are a number of genera, and they fit a lifetime T, and this is an exponential decay curve. So this is the self-organized critical state, in that there is the stasis part and the rapid evolutionary activity are both 2 sides of the same coin. The new species is trying to break through, is unable to, and then suddenly it breaks through. This is the power law. It dictates almost all of nature. So this is a freak wave. It suddenly happens. All the waves before it are of normal height, and suddenly a very high 20-meter high wave comes in, and then the rest of the waves are also normal. And this fits in with the punctuated equilibrium model of evolution as well. Look at the power of freak waves. They crack down ships, destroy them, huge vessels, but they're destroyed. So the power law has the ability to bring about massive changes over a very short period of time. And this is the nonlinear law on which mountains and trees and heart rhythms are all based, without exception. So now that we have demystified long periods of time, let's try and demystify the second component, randomness. Famously, Albert Einstein, he was against quantum mechanics. So he said, God does not play dice. There is no randomness here. There is determinism. Now, if you look at Brownian motion, you can program it into the computer. And Brownian motion is the classical theory of random motion. So, two molecules move in random order, collide, and a new molecule forms, and so on and so forth. It's very interesting to note that the pattern that emerges from Brownian motion is self-similar, and it has long-range order. So the small part is similar to the large part, and that is the self-similarity and the long-range order. So this keeps on repeating over a period of time. As long as this can be programmed on the computer, it cannot be random. Another very common example, practical example of randomness that we think of as random is the falling of leaves. But what does the Quran say about it? Not a leaf falls, but he knows it. There is not a grain in the darkness of the earth, nor anything fresh or dry, but is written in a clear record. That writing is what's known as determinism. Now, these are trees which are drawn on the computer using a tree equation. The famous Mandelbrot set, if you focus on a single strand and then you change the equation, it forms this random pattern. And then if you change the equation further, it makes another random pattern. You would think that it won't be able to go back, but it actually does. You change the equation back, it'll go here, and change it back, and it will go to the strand, and then finally to the Mandelbrot set. So this equation is what is known as a recursive equation. Its output goes back into the input, and it requires a seed number to initiate the recursive process. And then it goes on forever. So I take guidance from about deterministic evolution from this ayah of the Quran, وَالَّذِي قَدَّرَ فَهَدَى. So he determined it, then guided it. And our faith goes on to say that he keeps on guiding it. And so what appears to be random may actually be, and we believe, it is determined. And it requires the recursive equation and a seed number. And if we look at the universal constants, they are the seed numbers that fit into a lot of equations and create the entire universe, in my opinion. Now, over this period of time, we went on and replayed the tape of life of a single gene, the SOD1. So that was the theory that I developed, and now went on to explore that theory in practical terms. So we have the sequence of a large number of genes, and SOD1 is critical for the evolution of life because you can't fight off infection without SOD1. And in genomes, there was self-similarity patterns, and there were long-range correlations. These self-similarity patterns and long-range correlations are what is named as fractals. So when the wind of chaos passes through, what is remaining is the fractal. So the power law goes through, and the structure that remains is fractal. So I studied the evolution from very small organisms, lower organisms, to higher organisms, including humans, of the sequence of SOD1. And I begin that paper with the statement that extraordinary complexity of biological systems is generated by repeating patterns coded by recursive processes, which may be quantified by fractal analysis. And that is a direct scientific translation of the ayah of Surah Rum. Allahu yabdiyul khalqa thumma yu'iduhu thumma ilayhi turja'un. Allah begins creation and then he repeats it. The repetition of creation is the evidence of God. Now, Darwinian evolution would predict that, by random occurrence, one SOD1 formed, and then it gradually improved upon itself. That is not what we see in the organisms of SOD1. SOD1 evolved in multiple times in what are known as clades, in groups. And so the SOD1 of small organisms is very different from the SOD1 of the mice and related organisms, and very different from the SOD1 of cows and horses, and very different from of monkeys and humans. And if you look at this diagram, this is something that I came up with to be able to look at self-similarity. A small part of the sequence of the entire gene is shown here in the small square, and larger and larger pieces of sequences are shown until in the final square, the entire sequence is shown. And you can see that they are all very similar. So that self-similarity is evidence of fractal evolution. Now, if you would organize SOD1 evolution based on various phyla, it's called phylogenetics, or in taxonomic order, you would get this particular diagram. And if you were to look at the fractal exponent called alpha and plot it against the taxonomic order, you would get a relatively straight line with an R square of 0.49. So this is moderate correlation. But if you study taxonomic order from the fractal standpoint, you learn much more. You see that it organizes into a very straight line with a R square of 0.96. And there are 9 small groups, and these can be grouped into 3 major groups. And these 3 groups emerge, which are different from each other. And if you go back, you would notice that 1, 2, and 3 groups are there. This is a very small 4th group. And this is how SOD1 evolved. So studying evolution from a deterministic angle helps us understand evolution much more. Another model that can be made that I was interested in exploring was to identify new genes through a deterministic algorithm rather than to the standard random algorithms. And I published this in Immunogenetics, where I identified AXIN1 as a major Parkinson's disease gene, in fact, the 3rd Parkinson's disease gene. And it was rated very highly because suddenly it started being cited more and more, because AXIN1 was being discovered by other scientists around the globe as something really important in the biology of Parkinson's disease. And it's rated at the 83rd percentile, so in the top 25% of the research overall. So if something is true by a deterministic method, could not be located by a random method, then deterministic methods have value in science. So similarly, in my collaboration with Spain, I identified 2 genes at this particular locus, 12p11, for SLE, systemic lupus erythematosus. That's the disease I have expertise in. It's published in a very good journal. And I identified the gene in genetic data, and the Spanish data was of expression. It was a different data set, and the gene popped out from that data set. Obviously, it was not a random occurrence. We went on to show that the expression of TDX11 is altered, and hopefully one day we'll have a test to predict lupus and using DDX11 and be able to identify it early on. Similarly, for AXIN1, I hope that one day we'll be able to shut down AXIN1 or change its expression, which can easily is easily doable compared to any other gene for Parkinson's disease, and be able to modify Parkinson's disease one day. So these are two demonstrations of valued science if we think deterministically. Now, to conclude, here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He created you all from a single person. He created of like nature His mate, and He sent down for you 8 pairs. وَأَنزَلَ لَكُم مِّنَ الْأَنْعَامِ ثَمَانِيَةَ أَزْوَاجٍ. Anzala means sent down. So this is also the word used for iron, and we know that iron rained down from the meteors. And here again, the same word is used, anzala, and very interestingly, samaniyat azwaj. Now, if that is 8 pairs, now it is commonly translated as 8 cattle in pairs, but if you look at an'am is the plural of a ni'ma, and the ni'ma in any planet is actually its biological life. Now, if you look at the the biological kingdoms, there are 8. Samaniyata azwaj. There was this theory of panspermia proposed by Fred Hoyle and Chandra Vikrasha Singhe, where they show that there is evidence of microbial fossils in meteorites. And so it may be that the dust that is being talked about is the turab, is the stardust, and early organisms formed in meteorites in space, rained down on Earth and evolved deterministically, and finally man was the result. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار لآيات لأولي الألباب الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك فقنا عذاب النار. So the atheist scientist observes the universe and finds no evidence of God. And the Mu'min observes the universe and finds absolute evidence of God. And he reasons that this is a purposeful creation. And if that is a purposeful creation, I'm a purposeful creation. It means I'm accountable. And if I'm accountable, then either I will be rewarded or I will be punished. So my Lord, praise be to you, glory be to you, save me from the hellfire. Now, that is such an intelligent interpretation. The interpretation is what really matters, not the data, but the interpretation. And we have no problem with evolution because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can choose to create us any way He likes. What we have a problem with is randomness, which takes out the concept of God and the concept of hereafter by removing a purposeful creation and demeaning it into something of no value, something which is random, something which is not accountable. And once you have that, then the whole system of life is completely morphed into uh, a hedonistic point of view. So uh, the dust, maybe the stardust containing carbon bombarded through meteorites onto the Earth and evolved um, using the excellent culture medium on Earth to form very evolved forms of life. There was a biological Big Bang, just like the um, Big Bang in physics, and 8 separate kingdoms were created of biological life. And it's not a random process, it was a determined process. And if evolution took place, it was determined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He's the one who guided it. So here I presented a very brief overview of all of this work so that it can be reviewed easily and more thoughts can be generated from it. Thank you.